Somewhere on the internet right now, there's a headline claiming Leonor refused to wear the crown today. It's spreading. People are sharing it. And it is built on something that has never happened and, under Spanish law, never will happen, because Leonor is never going to be handed a crown to wear in the first place. Not today. Not on her coronation day. Not ever. And once you understand why, you'll understand something most royal coverage gets completely wrong about the Spanish monarchy. Stay with me, because this is one of those stories where the real answer is stranger and more interesting than the fake one. Let's start with what people think happens when a European monarch takes the throne. If your only reference point is British royal coverage, you picture Westminster Abbey. You picture an archbishop lowering Edward's crown onto a bowed head. You picture the sovereign's orb, the coronation spoon, centuries of ritual anointing with holy oil, a golden coach through the streets of London. That image is so dominant in the culture that people assume it's just what monarchies do. Crown goes on head, monarchy officially begins. It's clean, it's visual, it's dramatic, and it makes for great television. Spain does not do any of that. Spain has never done any of that, not in the modern constitutional era. There is no coronation ceremony in Spain. There is no anointing. There is no archbishop placing a crown on anyone's head. And there is no moment, past or future, where Leonor will wear the crown, because the Spanish crown, capital C, referring to the actual physical object, is not designed to be worn by anyone. That single fact should tell you immediately that a headline about Leonor refusing to wear a crown on a given day is not describing a real event. You cannot refuse to do something that isn't part of the process to begin with. It would be like reporting that a groom refused to throw the bridal bouquet. It's not his part of the ceremony. It was never going to happen regardless of what he wanted. So where does Spain's succession process actually happen, and what does it actually look like? This is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because the real mechanism is written directly into the Spanish constitution, and it's a mechanism most casual royal watchers have never heard explained. Article 57 of the Spanish Constitution governs the crown and succession. Within it, Article 57.4 lays out the process for how an heir formally becomes recognized before the nation. It does not describe a crowning. It describes an oath. The heir to the throne, upon reaching legal age, swears an oath before the Cortes Generales, Spain's parliament, to faithfully discharge their duties, to be loyal to the king, and to respect the constitution and the laws. That's the ceremony. Words spoken before elected representatives of the Spanish people, not an object placed on a head. Leonor already did this. On October 31, 2023, her 18th birthday, Leonor stood before the Cortes Generales and swore that oath. That was her formal proclamation as heir. Not a coronation. Not a crowning. A constitutional oath, delivered in front of the nation's elected lawmakers, broadcast to the country, and grounded entirely in Spain's post-Franco constitutional settlement. When Felipe himself became king in 2014 after his father Juan Carlos abdicated, the transition followed the same logic. There was a proclamation before the Cortes. There was a public ceremony. There was, notably, a royal crown and scepter present in the room, displayed on a table beside the king as a symbol of continuity. Nobody touched them. Nobody wore anything. They sat there as objects representing the institution, not as instruments used on a person. This is a detail that surprises a lot of people once they actually look into it, and it's worth sitting with for a second, because it tells you something about how the modern Spanish monarchy understands its own role. The crown and scepter exist. They're real, they're historic, they're kept and displayed as part of the institution's symbolic inheritance. But Spain's constitutional monarchy, rebuilt after the Franco dictatorship and formalized in the 1978 constitution, was deliberately built to emphasize continuity and restraint over spectacle. The monarchy survived the transition to democracy specifically because it positioned itself as a stabilizing, low-drama institution bound by law, not as a stage for grand religious ceremony. An elaborate coronation, complete with religious anointing and crown-wearing, would cut against everything the post-Franco monarchy was built to represent. So when you see a headline built around Leonor refusing a crown, what you're actually looking at is a category error dressed up as drama. It's applying a British framework to a Spanish institution that runs on entirely different constitutional logic. And once you know that, you can spot this pattern everywhere in low-quality royal content. Writers importing coronation imagery, crown-wearing imagery, who wore it best, tiara comparisons, all of it borrowed wholesale from the UK's much more visually ornate monarchy and pasted onto Spain, where none of it actually applies in the same way. Now, here's where it gets even more relevant to Leonor specifically, because while she was never going to be photographed refusing a crown, she has spent the last several years doing something far less photogenic and far more demanding, actually preparing, structurally and constitutionally, for the job she's going to inherit. In August 2023, Leonor entered the General Military Academy in Zaragoza to begin a 3-year military training program spanning all 3 branches of Spain's armed forces. This wasn't ceremonial. This was the same path her father Felipe walked before her, rooted in the constitutional expectation that Spain's head of state, as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, needs first-hand institutional grounding in the military. She completed an army phase at the General Military Academy. She moved into a naval phase that included a 5-month voyage aboard the training ship Juan Sebastián de Elcano, plus additional time aboard the frigate Blas de Lezo. Then came the Air and Space Force phase at the General Air and Space Academy in San Javier, Murcia, where she trained to fly alongside pilots, completed a parachuting course, becoming the only member of the royal family to do so, and on July 10, 2026, graduated with the rank of Alferez de Fragata alumna. At that graduation, her father presented her with the Grand Cross of Aeronautical Merit with White Distinction, one of the highest honors in Spain's military structure. That ceremony marked the formal close of her military education. Notice what actually generated a real, documented, photographed public moment here. It wasn't a crown. It was 3 years of physical training across land, sea, and air, culminating in a graduation ceremony with real institutional weight behind it. If you're looking for the genuine, official recognition, moments in Leonor's life, San Javier is one of them, not because a crown touched her head, but because the Spanish state has a structured, constitutionally informed process for preparing its future head of state, and she completed a major phase of it in front of the country. And her preparation doesn't stop with the military. In September 2026, Leonor begins a 4-year political science degree at Carlos III University of Madrid, the same program her younger sister, Infanta Sofia, is also studying. This wasn't a spontaneous choice. It was announced well in advance, in April 2026, and it represents the next structural phase of her preparation. After the military instills discipline and institutional grounding, the university phase is meant to build the political and civic literacy expected of a future constitutional monarch. She'll be balancing coursework with an increasing load of royal duties, the same juggling act she managed through secondary school and 3 years of military service. This is the actual architecture of how Spain prepares its heir. Not a single dramatic crowning moment captured on camera, but a sequence of institutional milestones stretched across years: an oath before Parliament at 18, military education across 3 branches, and now formal university study in political science, all building toward a role that, when it eventually begins, will begin the same way Felipe's did, with a proclamation before the Cortes, not a coronation. It's worth pausing here to ask why this distinction actually matters, beyond just correcting a factual error. Because there's a reason this kind of content spreads so easily in the first place, and it's worth understanding as a viewer, not just as a fact to file away. Fake or distorted royal headlines tend to follow a formula: take a real person, attach a dramatic verb, refused, snapped, humiliated, banished, and pair it with a vague enough event that it can't easily be checked in 5 seconds. Leonor refused to wear the crown today works precisely because most people don't know Spain's succession process well enough to immediately recognize the premise is broken. It sounds plausible if your only mental model of monarchy comes from Britain. That's not a coincidence, it's the entire business model of a huge portion of low-effort royal content right now, some of it increasingly generated by AI tools that string together plausible-sounding royal drama with zero grounding in how these institutions actually function. The words sound right. The premise is empty. There's a real academic body of work tracking public trust and perception around European monarchies, including research out of the University of Murcia, a project called The Crowns, led by Professor Antonia Martinez, that has studied how public opinion around monarchy is shaped, sustained, and eroded across different countries. One of the recurring findings in that kind of research is that misinformation and low-quality coverage don't just fail to inform people, they actively distort how institutions are perceived over time, especially for younger royals still building their public identity. Leonor is 20 years old. She is going to be covered for decades. The gap between the real, well-documented constitutional process she's actually going through and the invented crown refusal narrative circulating about her isn't a small thing. It shapes what an entire generation of viewers believes they know about how the Spanish monarchy works. So let's close the loop properly. Spain does not crown its monarchs. There is no ceremony, past, present, or future, in which Leonor puts on a crown. Her actual formal recognition as heir already happened, on her 18th birthday, in the form of a constitutional oath before the Cortes Generales, grounded in Article 57.4 of the Spanish Constitution. Her preparation since then has been military, not ceremonial, 3 years across the Army, Navy, and Air and Space Force, capped by her July 2026 graduation from San Javier. And her next chapter, beginning this September, is academic. 4 years of political science at Carlos III University, the same structural pathway her father and generations of Spanish heirs before her have followed in one form or another. Adapted to the modern constitutional monarchy Spain rebuilt after Franco. The version of this story with a crown and a refusal is more dramatic. It's also completely fabricated, built on an imported British template that doesn't map onto how the Spanish monarchy actually functions. The real version, an 18-year-old swearing a constitutional oath, then spending 3 years training across 3 military branches, then walking into a political science lecture hall as the future head of state, doesn't need embellishment. It's already one of the more unusual paths of institutional preparation happening anywhere in Europe right now, and it's happening in full public view, fully documented, with no crown required. That's the real story of how Leonor becomes Spain's next monarch. No refusal, no crown, just years of structured, constitutionally grounded preparation that most royal coverage never bothers to explain. Transparency note, not for broadcast, this script fully reframes the original title, which had no verifiable factual basis, no reporting exists of any crown refusal event involving Leonor, and structurally, Spanish succession does not involve crown wearing at all, making the premise impossible as stated rather than merely unconfirmed. Verified anchors used: Article 57.4 of the Spanish Constitution and the oath before Cortes succession mechanism, Leonor's October 31, 2023 constitutional oath on her 18th birthday, her 3-branch military training Army, Zaragoza, Navy, Elcano and Blas de Lezo, Air and Space, San Javier, her July 10, 2026 San Javier graduation and Grand Cross of Aeronautical Merit, her April 2026 announced September 2026 enrollment at Carlos III University in Political Science, Felipe VI's 2014 proclamation before the Cortes as a comparative precedent, and the University of Murcia's The Crowns project under Professor Antonia Martinez as a general reference on monarchy perception research used here only in broad terms, not attributed to any specific finding about this title. The British coronation contrast Westminster Abbey, Anointing, St. Edward's crown is presented as general public knowledge for comparative framing. No unverified tabloid figures were used in this script.